Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. In the wake of Joe Biden being declared the president-elect, I've seen a lot of people seem to think genuinely that they have defeated fascism. Newsflash, you are nowhere close. You know, okay, this is going to be a really quick rundown of how fascism rises because even though it's always a little different, the core of how it starts and how it happens is pretty much the same. So I want to hammer on those points for a bit. And it's also weird that everyone always goes for Nazi Germany because that's the biggest, most famous one, but people seem to conveniently forget that it was Mussolini in Italy who was actually responsible for coining the term fascism itself and leading the first fascist regime. Additionally, people seem to forget about the fascist regimes in Spain under Francisco Franco and in Portugal under Salazar. Throughout these different nations, the core situations before that allowed fascism to flourish and how the fascists came to power remain eerily the same. So let's start with Italy. So in Italy and with all these other nations, here's the historical context. In the wake of World War I, Europe has been fundamentally changed. Many of the old empires are gone. The Russian Empire, done and dusted, it's now the Soviet Union. The German Empire, dead, replaced with the Weimar Republic. The Kingdom of Italy still exists, but they're not happy with what they thought they would have gotten better gains from World War I. Austro-Hungarian Empire, gone. The notion of and the Ottoman Empire, gone. So the notion behind European identity that existed at the turn of the century has now been wiped off the face of the earth. And now there's a bunch of new nations with an emerging form of nationalism. And now there's political and geopolitical chaos between all these new areas, and people are trying to sort everything out. Additionally, there were these destructive wars, so people hated a lot of the establishment politicians. Strike me if this sounds familiar. And people felt that there had been something lost, whether they won the war or not. So people felt, on top of, the economic malaise of the Great Depression after the 1920s, there was this sense of people feeling that they needed to restore the old ways, the old nation. They were spurred by these patriotic leaders who promised to make sense out of the world again and restore their nation to former greatness. Italy was suffering economically. Germany was suffering economically. Spain was suffering economically. Portugal was suffering economically. And within these areas, you had political deadlock in systems that hadn't evolved and modernized because the ruling class and the elites that ruled these societies didn't want it to because they felt it was a threat to their power and influence. And so the systems continued to rot from within. And so more and more people felt the pinch, and there wasn't economic growth. And the cost of everything from food and rent and utilities was going up, and yet there was less work and less money to go around for all the people who required it to live. Strike me if this is sounding familiar. And this applies to Italy, Portugal, Spain, and Germany. Then you finally have a situation where there's so much political deadlock, and there is a new political boogeyman who emerges. In this case, in Europe, it was the communists and the socialists and the anarchists. Where have I heard this story before? And then on top of that, you have the ruling class fearful of the upending of what should be the normal, sensible society. Like, oh, we've seen what's happened in the Soviet Union. They got rid of the king, and there's now like women in parliament, and they're taking the money of the rich. We can't have this. And so, in the case of Italy, they were afraid that the king, anyway, was afraid that if the communists and the socialists won, he'd be out of a job. And so he started working with other conservatives and the church and Mussolini and his fascists. And so Mussolini said, hey, you get to keep your job, just make me dictator of Italy. And King said, okay. In Spain, they felt that the situation, there was too much political deadlock. Nothing was getting done. People were suffering, and there needed to be a strong man given power. And so a coup was called, but it was messy and it wasn't universal. And so it kicked off the Spanish Civil War, which was basically a dress rehearsal for World War II. In Portugal, same story. Political deadlock, economic malaise, a strongman rises who says, give me the power so I can fix things, so I can make our nations great again. We'll have more territory. We'll have a bigger economy. We'll, be victorious against all our enemies, both foreign and domestic. This is how it always rises. Look around in America right now and tell me with a straight face that the situation has somehow drastically improved by electing another neoliberal. The fascists are still out there. They're still organizing. They're still planning. Sure, they're mad. They're maybe not even going to accept the results. Maybe a bunch of the red states just say, no, it's been rigged, so we're going to actually secede from the U.S. and adhere to real President Donald Trump. I wouldn't put it past some of these people. But in terms of how fascism rises, the story is the same. It begins with political deadlock in a tired, old, outdated, and dysfunctional system. And it occurs with an economic system and an economic reality around people where there's no money, no jobs, and yet everything seems to cost more and more. And then there's always a strongman who comes to the forefront who says, I can make it better. I can fix this. I just need you to give up on democracy and these other ideologies and make me the supreme leader. Look around America and tell me that this is not prime time for the rise of fascism. Joe Biden is a delay to fascism. The fight continues. There is still a massive problem in America with your system, with your parties, with your economics, and with your society. The defeat of Donald Trump is not the defeat of fascism. Because to defeat fascism, you need to defeat the systems that enable them to rise in the first place, which is why the fight continues. And the fact that there are so many people thinking that they've already won when the battle is just beginning is definitely what's bothering me today.